Hello, I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge. Welcome to another edition of Half Hour on the Hill. Thank you for joining me, and I'm really pleased to have as my guest today Margaret Miley, Executive Director of the Midas Collaborative. So Margaret, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I know that we've known each other for many years and work closely on asset development issues, and that's obviously what we're going to get into. But if you could describe a little bit the Midas Collaborative first and sort of what that actually means. And
Sure, I'd love to. The Midas Collaborative is a statewide network of nonprofit organizations that operate in low and moderate income communities throughout the state. And we are also the nonprofit that supports the work that they do in low income communities. And for the most part, we're really working in the economic sphere. We're trying to help working families get financially stable, and we're trying to strengthen communities and make them more, higher functioning economically.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the different approaches in some of these nonprofits across the state to strengthen families economically?
Well, I think uniformly we're working in an economy that's working very well for some people, very few people, and not very well for others. And if I just were to take Marlboro as an example and take a look at what the economic circumstances were for a lot of the families here, it would be a very interesting look into financial stability. So, for example, in Marlboro, we have an economic indicator called the Family Economic Self-Sufficiency Standard, and that is a measure of how much a family needs to just survive on a very basic level. Housing, transportation, childcare, utilities, really just the basics. And we know here in Marlboro, if we have, for example, 2 adults in a family and an infant and a preschool child, they basically would need to clear about $3,400 a month just paying for housing, utilities, food, transportation, and childcare, just really the basics. So that really translates into a gross annual income of $81,000 a year. That seems like a lot of money. It's a high-cost state, as we know. And if we take a look at what the minimum wage is in this state, and if we have 2 working adults, they're coming in at about $33,000 if they're working full-time. If they're working at slightly higher than minimum wage, maybe $10.50 an hour, which is the average for Walmart, they'd be coming in at about $43,000 a year. So there's a very substantial gap. So clearly the economy is really rewarding some people's work and not a vast measure of other people's work. And it's interesting to see today in the news that at the top income bracket, the CEOs for the Fortune 500 companies, their pay just went up again to levels that were higher than the pre-crash income levels. So they're averaging $7 million a year.
Yeah, it's really quite shocking. And one of the things I talk about in terms of sort of tax policy issues is, a lot of people say, well, people are broke, people are struggling, and my comment to that is, well, yes, some people are struggling, but there are a lot of number of people who are doing quite well. For the people that are struggling, including the low and moderate income families that you're helping, what are some of the strategies to sort of get them at least to a higher economic bracket?
Yeah, we do a number of things. Given that we're working in this context, one of the things we really help people take a look at is what skills and capacities do they need to get into a situation where their income is better. What public benefits would they need to help stabilize them so they're less at risk of being, one medical problem away from financial disaster.
And just to note, you're talking about people that are working, full-time jobs,
absolutely.
often, 2 or 3 jobs. So these are people who need benefits but are putting in the same number of hours as anyone else is working.
Absolutely, and it's very good for families to have situations where the parents are not working 2 jobs. That has enormous social costs for all of us. So yes, another thing we take a look at is expenses. Can we help people budget and think more wisely about some of the consumption decisions they're making? In many cases, some of the financial services have very different prices. So, for example, some banking services, check cashers or payday lenders or others are costing families an awful lot, and that's really not, bank fees are not a productive use of anybody's income. So we work with folks to really think about how to stabilize their family budgets, how to look at other resources, and how to begin to save, if possible, to work toward building assets which provide more of an infrastructure for them and their families in the future.
Sure. And in the building assets, obviously you and I have worked together on the individual development account program, but also connected to the financial literacy and financial education. If you could talk a little bit about that approach and sort of its level of success.
Sure. I mean, we have gotten state funds, and thanks to your leadership. There are also federal funds to help folks save money, receive a match, and invest in an asset. And the idea behind this is to really incentivize folks to move, hopefully, up the income ladder and up the wealth ladder. And what we do is we welcome people into the nonprofit organizations, into the programs, and request that they save a certain amount of money per month. The nonprofit matches that savings, and then at the end of a savings period, they then take that match savings and invest in really a transformational asset for many of them. It might be investment in a micro business, it might be investment in post-secondary education for themselves or for a child, it could be a first home. So the idea is that during the course of their savings period, they're getting a lot of that financial education so that they can learn how to budget, they learn how to manage credit. In some cases, they work on remediating some of their credit issues. They learn how to build their skills, get the rest of their family involved, look for other resources, and really get into a planning mode so that they can sort of look forward, hopefully, and get themselves on the road to getting an asset. And assets are so important because, first of all, it commits you to a community in many cases. It commits you to your future, and it helps. It helps you to sort of move forward. And in the event of a medical or financial crisis, many times it's these assets that help people through. For example, if you own a home, you might be able to borrow against the equity at a future date to start a business or make it through a rainy day, as it were. So a lot of our work focuses on really talking to people about how they can move along and bringing in the tools and strategies that would help them do that.
And what has been the success rate of this sort of approach versus sort of more of a free market approach or something, this sort of IDA coupled with sort of the financial education? Are there success analyses and things like that?
Right. Yeah, we actually produced a report in March, which was an impact report on the activities that we had in 2010. And we really had some very powerful numbers. The average income of the folks in our program, of which there are close to 500, was about $24,000 a year. We had people saving a great deal. I actually have some numbers on it I could talk about after the break. But essentially, the 125 people who graduated last year invested in homes, small businesses, educations, rainy day funds, and other things. And the value of the assets that they invested in was about $10.1 million.
Wow, that's tremendous.
So that was it's really economically stimulating. And it was interesting because the state funds that were invested in this program, thanks to your work and others, by comparison, were quite small. So for every dollar of state money that went into the program, there was $65 in economic activity that was generated from it.
That's really impressive. And it's interesting because it's one of the conversations I have with people is sometimes they somehow think that money, spent on government programs or these kind of investments that somehow that money doesn't end up on the street with consumer spending or buying a home or all these things that stimulate the economy. I think there's a sense that this money goes to a government program but doesn't have an impact on the economy, when actually, especially now in a recession, that's exactly the kind of spending that is often stimulating the economy as opposed to sort of just the free market capitalism.
Yeah, absolutely. The people who come through the programs are very clear that they need that little bit, that match money, to help them just get over the hump and make these investments. So it's really exciting, and a lot of the investments, of course, are local. They're going to local colleges, they're buying homes locally, they're increasing the property taxes in the places that they're buying homes. And they're starting small businesses, which we know certainly are the jobs generators in this economy. Mm-hmm. So it's a great investment for the taxpayers.
That's great, and that's something that some of that state funding has gone away, but we're looking to build that for hopefully the future. Mm-hmm. And also with our new state treasurer, he's very focused on trying to find other sources of funding to focus on financial education and hopefully down the line individual development accounts as well.
Right. We're very excited about that. The financial education piece is very interesting as well. This is an economy that's incredibly sophisticated now, and I know years ago when I got out of high school, there weren't all of these products out there that there are for young people who are graduating from high school. So it's really important, particularly for young people, to understand what targets they are for the marketing for financial services. And I think they suspect this, certainly. They're constantly barraged with advertising, but sometimes it's hard to sort out what is sort of consumer benefiting information and what's another product coming your way. And so we've worked with a number of statewide and national organizations to try to get good consumer benefiting information out into the marketplace so that there's an alternative view when people are being bombarded with a lot of things that, quite honestly, are scams.
Sure. And I want to talk about that a little bit more and also get into the policy in terms of stopping that from a government approach as well. So I think we're going to take a break, and we'll be back in just a moment with the second half of Half Hour on the Hill.
Hi, I'm firefighter Mark. I just got back from fighting a fire that could have been prevented. Here's an easy and simple way to protect you and your family from a fire. Change your batteries in your smoke detector. When replacing the batteries in your smoke detector, make sure that you have fresh, new batteries. When testing your smoke detector, you want to make sure that you push the test button. And don't forget about carbon monoxide in your home. There are two types of detectors to protect yourself from carbon monoxide. This one is battery operated and needs to be mounted on your wall. This one needs to be plugged into your wall outlet. So remember, be smart, be aware, be fire safe.
Welcome to the second half of Half Hour on the Hill. I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge, and just speaking here with Margaret Miley, Executive Director of the Midas Collaborative. Margaret, we talked about some of the work that the Midas Collaborative does and also some of the really stark statistics about income inequality in Massachusetts and what a family needs to earn even to sort of have a decent quality of life. You and I worked together on creating this Asset Development Commission over 3 years ago. Essentially, we ran the commission together, even though I was the co-chair. You were always, I thought, the third co-chair. And we came out with a number of recommendations, and I just wanted to highlight some of the recommendations and sort of how that ties to income inequality and helping the poor families that the Midas Collaborative is dedicated to helping every day. So probably the first one and really the major bill from the effort is the asset limit bill to remove asset limit. So if you want to talk a little bit about that and how that interacts with sort of economic self-sufficiency.
That would be great. One of our findings, as you certainly recall, from the Asset Development Commission, was that about 40% of Massachusetts families felt financially unstable. So that's a really stark number.
It's really frightening, yeah.
Yeah. And the asset limits bill was an attempt to help folks who were on public benefits make a progression off of public benefits in a way that really was rational. The way the public benefits system, TANF, the welfare program is set up right now, people need to be pretty much absolutely destitute with very small children in order to get on welfare. It is a very, very small program at this point. Most folks on it are actually disabled. So there's not a lot of people on welfare at all. It's, I think it's less than 3% of the population of the state. But nevertheless, it really is very important for people in that situation to be able to see a light at the end of the tunnel and a sequence for getting off of the system. So particularly as their children get into school, we want to provide incentives and a pathway for them to literally get off the system and into a job. And what often happens is as they start to get some income, the benefits that have been helping keep them stable start slipping away underneath them. It's a term we call the cliff effect. And many times if they watch people around them struggle to get up the income ladder with great difficulty, they will not even try.
They just sort of throw up their hands and say that I don't see a path to being economically sustainable by going out and working, so it's a disincentive.
Absolutely, absolutely. And at the same time, the grant that we get for cash assistance is not even enough at all to get anywhere. So it's a really difficult situation that people find themselves in. And one of the things that we want to encourage them to do is to make a little bit of a sequence here. And for example, to be able to start saving and working part-time and putting some money in the bank and getting ready for the bigger jump. And there are big restrictions now on what people can have. They really can't have a vehicle that's worth much. They can't have anything in the bank. And so that the asset limits are basically telling folks you can have nothing if you're on public benefits. And so what we're trying to do is bring up that threshold a little bit so that they can get prepared to hopefully jump across this cliff that we described.
And you gave the example of a car. And this is one of the things I describe a lot, you know, when I testified before the committee about this, is that basically saying that a person would go out and get a car that, you know, almost barely works or is likely to break down. So obviously, you know, that's going to decrease the chance that that person is going to be able to get to work on time, or you know, might be more likely to be fired if they miss a day of work. So it's, again, sort of the system is setting up someone for failure.
Absolutely, yeah, that's it. And so you've been, you know, wonderful to sponsor these bills because it's a complicated situation, but to help people just over that bridge is really valuable to a lot of folks that we work with.
Yeah, that's one of the major bills, but I know, you know, you talked about sort of there's more and more sophisticated financial instruments now out in the world, and, you know, even, you know, high school students, college students get all these, you know, credit card offers and loans in the mail. And this sort of deals with predatory lending, and I know that we've also filed legislation on that issue. So if that might be something you could talk about.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues is regulating the debt collection industry, which is very important. There's a new industry that has grown up since the crash and since just before the crash, where there are a lot of debt collectors who buy debt from credit card companies and then attempt to collect on the debt. In some cases, because the credit reporting system is in need of revamping, sometimes those loans are not even owed. And yet the debt collectors will come after borrowers with very little documentation and will actually use the small claims court system as their enforcement mechanism. So borrowers find that when they go into the court system, they have very few protections. For example, debt collectors have not had to document that the loan is actually owed, the money is actually owed, and yet they can go in and get all sorts of directives from the court in order to enforce their collection. So unlike other banking areas, this is really pretty much unregulated.
Right.
And so it's very important in Massachusetts, and I thank you for your help on that, to make sure that these folks are upstanding business people, and that when they call the borrowers, that actually the money is owed. Another piece of that is that if people do suffer a financial catastrophe and need to get basically the state's version of bankruptcy, that they be allowed to keep a few basic assets
Sure.
in order to rebuild their financial lives. And that includes a car, a computer, a little bit of money in the bank. The old legislation that related to this allowed people to keep a mule and a horse and some bales of hay. So clearly that legislation was outdated. So that bill actually was signed into law by the governor, and we appreciate your help in making that happen. So it really does allow people, if they're in crisis, to not get to the point where they're living in the street. They can stay in their homes, they can get to work, and they can start to rebound.
Absolutely, and it's an interesting contrast because obviously the past few years on the federal level, you know, we've been bailing out automobile companies, big banks that, you know, have fallen into financial ruin largely because of sort of the mistakes of a select few and the greedy few. The least we can do is provide similar relief in terms of helping people get up, you know, off their feet when they're going through a financial crisis if they're less well off or middle class, and that's what, you know, this kind of bill will help do.
Absolutely, yeah.
The other effort that I know has been filed for many years, and it seems like we've finally built up some momentum to hopefully pass it this year, is the area of financial education. And I was wondering if you could talk about sort of your experience with financial education, both with IDAs, but also with adding it to our curriculum, and also your work with Treasurer Grossman, who really has already been a great leader on this, even in the few short months he's been the treasurer.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly, as you and I remember in the Massachusetts Asset Development Commission, in the community conversations, in the public hearings, people who were trying to figure out their finances or struggling with their financial stability said repeatedly, I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know where to go to get help. I didn't know where to go to get good information. And many of them were taken advantage of by predatory lenders, for example, in the mortgage sector. So we really felt like because of the sophistication and lack of regulation in this marketplace, we at least needed to keep consumers informed. So we've been working hard to make sure that this is available to adults, to seniors, to youth, and others, and particularly having the information that's really relevant to whatever financial decisions they're making at that point in their lives. So in the adult world, we work with the match savings folks, the IDA folks, and we do pretty intensive financial education, as I described before, including, you know, credit repair, planning exercises, you know, very specific consumption decisions like buying versus leasing a car.
Right. And if I might add, that kind of financial literacy classes has proven to have a lower foreclosure rate and a lower rate of bankruptcy and all these things. So it actually, you know, it's actually been proven to work. Absolutely.
And what's interesting is people join the program because they're interested in getting a match on their savings, and then when they leave the program, they describe that really the value to them, although they were happy to have the match and happy to buy the asset, but the value to them was the information, and that they felt like they left with a plan and they knew where to go for more help, and they just felt more in control, which helps us all. So one of the things we're interested in doing with kids is making sure that financial education is part of the curriculum. It's kind of strange to think that it is not, but it is in some of the schools across the state, but it's not required. And so you were kind enough to file legislation to require financial education as part of the Massachusetts curriculum frameworks. At this point, I think we're looking at it being in the math curriculum. But the idea is, again, that we catch people a little bit upstream before they make some of the difficult financial decisions that some of us older folks have made, and to get them sort of in charge of their own finances before they get out in the marketplace.
Absolutely, and I would add here in Marlboro has a sort of a financial reality fair for its high school students that's sponsored by many of the credit unions, including St. Mary's Credit Union, and it just does a wonderful job of educating high school students about all the costs that they can expect to assume once they're in college or after college.
Yeah, that's a wonderful model, and I think there's 13 of them going on across the state in between April and May, and people report just a wonderful experiential learning experience. I do want to mention that we've posted a lot of those workshops and others on the website masssaves.org, where people can learn online information or learn about workshops going on in their community, or connect with other educators or other people who are interested in the topic.
That's terrific. That's great. And obviously that's work that Treasurer Grossman is working to sort of spread the message across the state and maybe add some more financial education as part of his programming as well.
Absolutely. He has really been engaged on issues around working families in the Commonwealth, and it's interesting to see how much initiative he has in working on the Massachusetts economy, in addition to working in financial education, as his office has been for a number of years. He's trying to get more funding in to do community-based financial education. He also is working to incentivize community banks to do more lending to small businesses, which is going to help the economy as well. So he's been a wonderful partner. We're delighted that he's interested in this topic.
Are there other areas of legislation that either the Commission has focused on or you think need to be solved in this session that you'd like to see be worked on as part of the Midas Collaborative?
Well, a major win that I should mention that we had last session were protection for folks who were living in foreclosed homes as tenants. In many cases, people had no idea that their landlords might have been in trouble, and they would come home one evening and find out that they were about to be evicted. So with your help and others, that legislation went through to protect tenants in foreclosed properties. So that was a wonderful win and very stabilizing again for the economy. I think one thing that the Commission had talked about, it might be a budgetary challenge at this point, is the Earned Income Tax Credit for workers.
Absolutely.
As many people know, the federal government provides a tax credit for low-income families, and the state matches it 15%. Some of us would be interested in that being increased so that we literally help people who are not getting the living wages, as I described earlier.
Sure.
So we need to really work on making work pay so people do work, and it would be wonderful for the legislature to consider that as an opportunity.
Absolutely. And I know we're near the end of the show. I just wanted to ask, I know you're an economist as well, and sometimes people don't realize that, and just, all these things we're talking about, in the end, it's better for a stronger economy for the whole state, right?
Absolutely, and I think, just to use an international example, I think we just need to look south of our border to see what happens when wages are reduced to the point where people do not feel like it's even worth it. They cannot survive on the wages that they're offered. This happened in the early 90s when NAFTA came to Mexico, and wages went down and down and down, and parents worked 2 and 3 jobs, and now their kids looked at their parents killing themselves and said, this is not an option for me. And now that economy is extremely dysfunctional, and a whole drug trade has resulted from it, and a lot of emigration has resulted as well. So I think we really need to make sure that the economy functions for everyone.
Absolutely. Well, I know we could talk that for many, many hours. Thank you so much for joining me and having a talk about all this great work, and look forward to working on the session, getting these things accomplished. And thanks very much for joining me for another edition of Half Hour on the Hill.
Thank you.